The morning sun blazes across the Philippine Sea like molten copper, its rays cutting through the crystal clear air at 20,000 feet. It's 10:30 a.m., June 19th, 1944, and Lieutenant Alex Vraciu feels the familiar weight of his flight harness pressing against his shoulders as he settles into the cockpit of his Grumman F6F Hellcat. The leather seat is already warm from the tropical sun, and he can smell the distinct mix of aviation fuel, oil, and salt air that defines carrier operations. Through his canopy, Vraciu watches the deck crew scurrying below like ants on the USS Lexington's flight deck. Their movements are urgent but practiced. They know what's coming. The ship's radar has been painting targets for the last hour, and the plots are terrifying. Over 60 Japanese aircraft bearing down on Task Force 58, with more formations detected behind them. But Alex Vraciu isn't afraid. His hand rests confidently on the throttle of his Hellcat, and he can feel the 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine rumbling beneath him like a caged beast. 6 months ago, he might have been terrified. 6 months ago, American pilots were still flying the inferior F4F Wildcat, getting carved up by Japanese Zeros, whose pilots seemed to dance through the sky with supernatural grace. Today is different. Today, Vraciu flies a machine that represents the cutting edge of American industrial might, a fighter so advanced it makes the legendary Zero look like a relic from another era. 300 miles to the west, Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nishizawa leads his formation of Mitsubishi Zeros off the deck of the carrier Zukaku. The morning air is smooth, perfect flying weather, and Nishizawa allows himself a moment of satisfaction. He is Japan's greatest living ace, with over 80 confirmed victories, and the pilots following him represent the cream of what's left of Japanese naval aviation. They're flying toward what they expect to be another easy victory. For 3 years, the Zero has ruled the Pacific skies. Its lightweight construction allows it to outmaneuver any American fighter, to climb higher and turn tighter than anything the Americans have produced. Japanese pilots have become legends in their own time, aerial samurai whose skills seem almost mystical to their enemies. But as Nishizawa's formation approaches the American fleet, something is wrong. The radar returns show the Americans launching fighters in unprecedented numbers. Not the desperate handful they're used to seeing, but wave after wave of contacts climbing to meet them. What Nishizawa doesn't know, what no Japanese pilot comprehends yet, is that they're flying toward their destruction. They expect to face Wildcats and maybe some of the new fighters they've heard rumors about. They have no idea they're about to encounter a technological revolution that will shatter 3 years of Japanese air superiority in a single devastating morning. The question that will haunt Japanese survivors for the rest of their lives: how could their invincible Zeros suddenly become flying coffins? The transformation didn't happen overnight. For months, American pilots had been training with their new Hellcats, learning the capabilities of a fighter that seemed almost too good to be true. Ted Crosby, flying with VF-18 aboard the Bunker Hill, remembered his first reaction when he saw the F6F's specifications. I was just a new young kid, but I knew once we had the F6F, we had it made. The numbers told the story. Where the Zero weighed in at just 5,300 pounds, built for agility over protection, the Hellcat tipped the scales at 12,200 pounds of armored steel and devastating firepower. The Japanese fighter carried two 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns. The American beast mounted 6.50 caliber machine guns that could literally tear an enemy aircraft apart in seconds. But it wasn't just about firepower. The Hellcat supercharger gave it something no American fighter had possessed before: the ability to climb with a Zero and still have power left over. For 3 years, Japanese pilots had used their superior climb rate as their primary advantage, luring American fighters into vertical fights where the heavier American planes would stall out, leaving them helpless targets. Lieutenant Commander James Bellows, a Midway veteran, had drilled this advantage into his pilots during training. The Zeros would climb steeply, hoping that inexperienced pilots would follow in pursuit. Usually they did, only to have their engines stall out. But the Hellcats had a supercharger that enabled the fighter to climb sharply with ease. Many Zero pilots discovered that the Hellcat was not a wildcat, usually the last lesson they ever learned. Admiral Ozawa, commanding the Japanese mobile fleet, steams toward the Americans with what appears to be overwhelming force. His 9 carriers launch 430 aircraft in 4 massive waves, supported by an additional 540 land-based fighters and bombers from Guam and surrounding islands. On paper, it's a force capable of destroying any fleet in history. But Ozawa doesn't know that American carrier strikes 2 days earlier have already eliminated his land-based air support. Vice Admiral Kakuji Kakuta, commanding those decimated squadrons, has failed to report the catastrophic losses to his superior. Ozawa sails toward battle believing he has nearly 1,000 aircraft at his disposal, when in reality, his carriers are alone. Aboard the Lexington, the Combat Information Center crackles with tense energy. Lieutenant Joseph Eggert, Mitcher's fighter director officer, studies the radar screen that shows the approaching Japanese formations. Next to him, Lieutenant Charles Sims adjusts his headphones. Sims speaks fluent Japanese and will spend the day intercepting enemy radio communications, giving American pilots advance warning of Japanese tactics. At 10:23 a.m., the order goes out across Task Force 58, launch fighters. The familiar circus cry, "Hey Rube!" echoes through ready rooms as over 200 Hellcat pilots race to their aircraft. The sound is thunderous, dozens of 2,000 horsepower engines roaring to life simultaneously, propellers biting into the warm tropical air. Vraciu checks his gun sight one final time. The Hellcat's armament control allows him to fire 2 guns at a time, 4 at a time, or all 6 simultaneously. For his first engagement, he sets all 6 guns to fire together. 3,600 rounds per minute of devastating .50 caliber fire. 300 miles away, the approaching Japanese formation makes its first fatal error. Instead of pressing their attack immediately, they circle at 20,000 feet to regroup and reorganize. Those precious minutes, time that could have been used to close with the American fleet before the defenders can fully organize, are wasted in perfectionist formation flying. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading Essex's fighter squadron, spots the enemy first. The Japanese formation stretches across the sky like a dark cloud, easily 60 aircraft in disciplined ranks. But Brewer notices something that makes his pulse quicken. They're flying in parade formation, not combat spread. These pilots are treating this like a training exercise, not a life-or-death battle. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," Brewer calls into his radio. Looks like they brought the whole Japanese Air Force with them. As the two forces converge, the contrast becomes stark. The American pilots are flying individually and in loose pairs, using tactics learned through 3 years of bitter combat experience. Each Hellcat pilot has been trained to think independently, to adapt to changing situations, to survive. The Japanese pilots, by contrast, fly in rigid formations drilled into them during abbreviated training programs. Japan's pilot shortage has forced them to rush aviators to the fleet with minimal experience. Many have fewer than 100 hours of flight time. Some have never fired their guns in anger. The stage is set for what will become the most lopsided aerial battle in history. but neither side fully comprehends what's about to unfold. The Americans know their Hellcats are superior to anything they've flown before, but they don't yet understand just how completely the technological balance has shifted. The Japanese pilots maintain their confidence in the Zero's legendary maneuverability and their own samurai spirit. They cannot imagine that American industry has not only matched, but surpassed their finest fighter aircraft. In minutes, the illusion of Japanese air superiority, built over 3 years of victories from Pearl Harbor to the Solomon Islands, is about to be shattered forever. The first collision happens at 11:39 a.m., and it's over before most of the Japanese pilots realize they're in a fight. Commander Charles Brewer spots a Japanese formation leader and locks onto his tail from 800 feet. The Zero pilot, expecting the usual turning fight where his aircraft's superior maneuverability would give him the advantage, begins a graceful bank to the left. He has no idea that the Hellcat behind him doesn't need to turn. It can simply muscle through the air with brute force. Brewer's 6.50 caliber machine guns erupt in a thunderous roar. The sound is unlike anything the Japanese pilot has ever heard. Not the sharp crack of 20mm cannons, but a continuous, devastating hammer blow of heavy machine gun fire. The bullets, each one nearly half an inch in diameter, tear through the Zero's lightweight aluminum skin like tissue paper. The Japanese fighter disintegrates. Pieces of wing and fuselage spin away in the slipstream as the aircraft cartwheel toward the ocean, trailing fire and smoke. Brewer has barely finished his first attack when he spots a second target. 8 seconds later, another Zero plummets toward the waves. Across the sky, the pattern repeats with mechanical precision. The Japanese pilots try every maneuver in their repertoire: sharp climbing turns, diving attacks, the famous Zero loop that has claimed so many American lives. But every tactic that worked against the Wildcat fails catastrophically against the Hellcat. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu finds himself in the middle of what can only be described as an aerial massacre. His first target, a Judy dive bomber, approaches in a shallow dive, its pilot probably hoping to line up a shot on one of the American carriers far below. Vraciu angles his Hellcat into an intercept course and opens fire at 400 yards. The effect is instantaneous and devastating. His 6 machine guns pour out 3,600 rounds per minute, and the Judy simply comes apart in midair. The engine tears free from the fuselage, the wings fold upward like a closing book, and debris peppers Vraciu's Hellcat as he flies through the expanding cloud of wreckage. "Splash one!" Vraciu calls into his radio, but there's no time for celebration. All around him, the sky is filled with burning Japanese aircraft. He banks left and spots another formation of dive bombers flying in tight formation as if they were on parade. What happens next defies everything the Japanese pilots thought they knew about aerial combat. Vraciu doesn't try to engage them in the traditional dogfight they expect. Instead, he simply flies straight at them, using his Hellcat's superior speed and firepower to blast through their formation like a bowling ball through pins. His second victim explodes so violently that Vraciu has to pull up sharply to avoid the debris. His third target tries to dive away, but the Hellcat's superior power-to-weight ratio allows Vraciu to follow him down, guns blazing. The Zero's lightweight construction, designed for maximum agility, becomes a fatal weakness when faced with the Hellcat's heavy machine guns. In 8 minutes, Vraciu shoots down 6 Japanese aircraft using just 360 rounds of ammunition, an average of 60 rounds per kill. When he finally returns to the Lexington, he's grinning ear to ear, holding up 6 gloved fingers for the cameras. But Vraciu's success is just one small part of a larger catastrophe unfolding across hundreds of square miles of Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, flying from the Essex, claims 5 kills in a single engagement. Ensign C.W. Plant's Hellcat takes 150 hits from Japanese fire, but keeps flying. The armor protection that makes the American fighter so heavy also makes it nearly indestructible. The Japanese pilots, meanwhile, face a technological reality they're completely unprepared for. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's greatest aces, later described the terror of discovering that American fighters could now climb with Zeros. We were used to the Americans trying to follow us up, then stalling out and becoming easy targets. But these new fighters just kept climbing. They were stronger, faster, and their guns could destroy a Zero with just a few hits. The slaughter is so complete that American pilots begin to feel almost guilty. Lieutenant Don Gordon of the Lexington watches a formation of 4 Japanese torpedo bombers flying in perfect formation, apparently unaware that they're about to die. He lines up on the first aircraft and fires a short burst. The plane explodes instantly. The second bomber tries to turn away, but Gordon's Hellcat simply overpowers it, his machine guns tearing the aircraft apart. The third bomber attempts to dive toward the water, but Gordon follows him down, firing continuously until the Japanese plane hits the ocean in a geyser of foam and flame. The fourth pilot, having watched his 3 companions die in seconds, simply flies away. Gordon lets him go. There are plenty of other targets. What the Americans don't fully realize yet is that they're not just winning a battle. They're witnessing the complete destruction of Japanese naval aviation. Each Zero that falls represents not just an aircraft, but a pilot who took years to train and cannot be replaced. Japan's abbreviated training programs are producing pilots with minimal experience, and those few veteran aces who remain are being systematically eliminated by American fighters that are simply superior in every measurable way. Admiral Ozawa, aboard the carrier Zukaku, receives the first reports with disbelief. His staff officers report that the first attack wave has been disrupted by American fighters, but the numbers make no sense. How can 69 aircraft encounter American defenders and have only 27 return? How can experienced Japanese pilots flying the legendary Zero be defeated so completely? The answer becomes clear when the survivors land. Their aircraft are riddled with holes from 50 caliber machine guns. Several pilots are wounded, and those who can speak describe American fighters that climbed like rockets and fired like battleships. But Ozawa's nightmare is just beginning. The second wave of 128 aircraft launches at noon, and within 30 minutes, only 31 return. The third wave of 47 planes sees half its aircraft get lost, trying to find the American fleet, and those that do locate the enemy are shot down almost immediately. By 2 p.m., Ozawa's carriers are nearly empty. Of the 430 aircraft he launched that morning, fewer than 100 have returned, and many of those are so damaged they'll never fly again. His staff officers struggle to comprehend the numbers. American pilots have achieved kill ratios of better than 10 to 1, performance that should be impossible in aerial combat. Lieutenant Charles Sims, the Japanese-speaking American intelligence officer, provides the final, devastating insight. Intercepting Japanese radio transmissions, he hears pilots screaming in terror as they encounter Hellcats for the first time. The confident chatter of the morning has been replaced by panic, confusion, and desperate calls for help that will never come. As the sun begins to set on June 19, 1944, the age of Japanese air superiority has ended forever. In a single day, American technological superiority has transformed the Pacific War from a desperate struggle for survival into an inevitable march toward victory. The Japanese pilots who survive will return to their carriers with a new understanding. Their legendary Zeros have become flying coffins, and the Americans now own the sky. The silence aboard the Japanese carriers that evening was deafening. Admiral Ozawa stood on the bridge of the Zuikaku, staring at a tactical board that told a story almost too horrific to believe. Of the 430 carrier aircraft that had launched that morning with such confidence, only 35 remained operational. In a single day, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost more aircraft than in any battle since the war began. The human cost was even more devastating. Japan had lost not just machines, but the irreplaceable pilots who flew them. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nishizawa, the legendary ace who had led the morning's first attack, was among the missing. The man Japanese propaganda called the Devil of Rabaul had simply vanished into the Philippine Sea, another victim of American .50 caliber machine guns. For the surviving Japanese pilots, the trauma went far deeper than physical wounds. Their entire understanding of aerial combat had been shattered in a matter of hours. Petty Officer Saburo Sakai, one of the few veterans to survive the day, later wrote, "We had been taught that Japanese spirit and superior training would always overcome American material advantages. But when 6 machine guns can destroy your aircraft with a single burst, spirit means nothing." Aboard the American carriers, the mood was jubilant but tinged with amazement. Alex Vraciu, now the Navy's leading ace after his 6 kills, found himself surrounded by reporters and photographers. But his thoughts kept returning to the Japanese pilots he'd shot down. "They were brave men," he told a correspondent. "They just didn't have the right equipment for this war anymore." The technological revolution that destroyed Japanese air power that day represented more than just superior engineering. It reflected the fundamental transformation of American industry during World War II. The F6F Hellcat was the product of lessons learned in blood over 2 years of combat, refined by engineers who understood that pilot survival was more important than maximum performance. Where the Zero prioritized agility above all else, the Hellcat achieved the perfect balance of speed, firepower, protection, and handling that modern air combat demanded. Its armor could absorb punishment that would destroy a Japanese fighter. Its supercharged engine provided power at all altitudes, and its 650 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower that could down an enemy aircraft with seconds of fire. The battle's impact rippled far beyond the Philippine Sea. Within weeks, the loss of trained pilots forced Japan to begin using kamikaze tactics, suicide attacks that reflected not fanatical devotion, but desperate recognition that conventional aerial combat was no longer possible. The cream of Japanese naval aviation, built up over decades of careful training, had been destroyed in a single morning. For the American war effort, June 19, 1944, marked the moment when technological superiority became overwhelming. The same industrial capacity that produced Liberty ships by the hundreds could now manufacture fighters that dominated the sky. Every major American carrier would soon deploy full squadrons of Hellcats, making Japanese resistance increasingly futile. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American pilots dubbed that day's slaughter, proved that modern warfare had entered a new phase where technological advantage could determine the outcome of battles before they were even fought. The brave Japanese pilots who died that day weren't defeated by superior tactics or training. They were overwhelmed by machines that rendered their aircraft obsolete. Today, as nations compete to develop hypersonic missiles, stealth fighters, and artificial intelligence systems, the lesson of June 19, 1944, remains startlingly relevant. Technological revolutions don't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive in the form of confused enemy pilots, radioing that their weapons no longer work, their tactics no longer matter, and their training has become irrelevant overnight. The F6F Hellcat didn't just win the Battle of the Philippine Sea, it demonstrated how a single technological breakthrough can shift the balance of global power in a matter of hours. For the Japanese pilots who survived that terrible day, the message was clear. The age of the samurai warrior, no matter how skilled or brave, had ended forever in the face of American industrial might. The devastation was so complete that Japan would never again attempt a major carrier operation. The path to Tokyo Bay, an ultimate victory, now lay open before the advancing American fleet. Paved by the wreckage of 346 Japanese aircraft that fell like autumn leaves into the Philippine Sea on the day American fighters learned to dominate the sky. Want to see more incredible stories of technological warfare that changed history? Subscribe and hit the bell icon, because the next revolution might already be here.